Sterlington Stairlift Stories for Children. Sterlington's Ever-Ready Friend. Part 1. The Beginning. Sterlington knew a stairlift in a big house with pillars each side of the front door. In the house lived a girl called Fiona Fortune. Her mum and dad and brother lived there too, but their neighbours all knew Fiona best because she was so chatty. Fiona spoke very politely and always dressed in smart clothes. Because she was so smart, instead of calling her Fiona, some people thought they should be more formal, so they called her Miss Fortune. "Good morning, Miss Fortune," they would say when they saw her on her way to school. "Good morning, Miss Fortune," when she went into the village store. "Good afternoon, Miss Fortune," when she was going home from school. "Sweet dreams, Miss Fortune," her dad would say when he kissed her good night at bedtime. Her brother, Lawrence, was not so smart. He usually looked scruffy, and his clothes always had a stain on them, usually ink or mud or something horrible like that. But his friends still liked him, and instead of Lawrence they called him Lance for short. "Good morning, Lawrence," grown-up people would say when they saw him on his way to school. But when his friends saw him they would say, "Hiya, Lance." Part 2. Granny. Fiona and Lawrence had a grandma who lived in a house a few kilometres away. Sometimes they would go to visit her, and they liked that because she used to give them some most delicious chocolate biscuits. Grandma's name was Eileen Pound, and when she was young she was very pretty and had ginger hair. But as she got older her hair turned a bit grey and she became unwell. The children called her Granny Pound, and they did have lots of fun when they went to see her. Because of being ill and having an accident, Granny Pound had bad legs, and she used a stairlift to get upstairs to bed and to the bathroom. When Miss Fortune and her brother Lance Fortune went there, they wanted to ride on the stairlift, but Granny Pound wouldn't let them. "You'll wear my batteries out if you play around on the thing, then how am I supposed to get upstairs?" she asked them. The stairlift had a key just like a car has a key, so without the key the car won't go, and neither would Granny's stairlift. So Granny used to remove the key and keep it in her pocket when the children were around. Part 3. Ever Ready. The stairlift was called Ever Ready because he had always worked properly and always seemed ready to go, and Eileen Pound was very pleased about that. But Ever Ready knew that Fiona Fortune would really like to have a ride upstairs on his very comfortable seat if she got the chance. One night Sterlington Stairlift and Ever Ready were having a chat in their special stairlift message language. They sent tiny vibrations which went along the rail, across the landing, through the landing window, out into the fresh air between the trees and lamp posts and telegraph poles, through the landing window in other houses, across the landing, along the rail, straight to the other stairlift. The stairlifts in the town sent messages to each other every night, but nobody else knew, no cats or dogs or foxes or birds or people. It was all done very quietly, and only stairlifts knew. That was how Sterlington knew that Ever Ready was a bit worried about Fiona Fortune wanting a ride on his very comfortable seat, because Ever Ready told him in a secret stairlift message. Part 4. Clothing. In the hot weather, Lawrence, whose friends called him Lance, and Fiona, whom people called Miss Fortune, wore lovely light summer clothes so they wouldn't get too warm and sticky. Fiona always looked very cool and smart, but Lawrence always seemed to get some kind of stain on his shirt and trousers. On the 18th of June he got grease on his clothes. He was doing something to his bike, and it was new, clean grease, but when it got on his nice shirt it made it look all gungy and horrible. But Fiona looked very smart in her long summer dress with stripes, and with her hair tied in a ponytail with a lilac-coloured ribbon. On that day their mum took the children to Granny Pound's house and told them to be very good while she went to an important meeting in the town. Part 5. The Garden. They were in the garden sitting on a wooden bench when Fiona said to Lawrence, "Show me what you've got in your pocket, scruffy old Lance." "No," said Lawrence. "Go on," said Fiona. "I know boys always carry a lot of junky things around with them. I want to see what junk you've got." Don't know what I've got, can't remember, said Lawrence. After a bit more prodding and teasing, Lawrence started to empty his pockets. It was amazing just how much stuff came out, and even more amazing how he managed to get so much stuff in his pocket to start with. Fiona thought it would be even more amazing if he managed to get it all back again in his pockets. There was a screw, a penknife, an elastic band, a plaster, some string, a tube of bike grease, a piece of rag, 7 bus tickets, a piece of wire, and 9 other things which are too horrible to mention in a nice story like this. Fiona, whom people called Miss Fortune, looked at all the junk, including the 9 other things which are too horrible to mention, and thought about what she could do with them. She picked up 3 things, but none of the ones which are too horrible to mention. Let me borrow these. I'll hide them in the house, and you have to find them, but give me a little while to find some good places, said Fiona. OK, said Lawrence, who liked finding things. Call me when you've hidden them. Part 6. The House. Fiona went into the house and saw Granny Pound, who looked a bit tired. What are you cheeky monkeys up to? She asked. We are going to play a hide-and-find game, said Fiona. I'll hide some of Lawrence's things in the house, and he's got to find them. All right, said Granny. I might have a nap soon, so play nicely and wake me up if you need anything. OK, thanks, Granny, said Fiona. I won't hide anything in here, though, then my scruffy brother won't disturb you. She went out of the room, closing the door so Granny could enjoy her nap in peace. It took Fiona about 2 minutes to realise she was all alone with Everready the stairlift. She sat down on the very comfortable seat, pushed the lever, but nothing happened. Why won't it work, she wondered. Fiona, whom people called Miss Fortune, was not very good with machines, but she could work some things out. After a quick look around, she saw the lock, but there was no key in it. That was because Granny Pound had taken the key out and put it in her pocket, so the children wouldn't play around and wear her batteries down. She sat on the bottom step and looked at the things she'd borrowed from Lawrence. One of them was a piece of wire. She pushed the end of the wire into Everready's lock and turned and twisted and prodded and poked the other end of the wire this way and that, up and down, round and round, until suddenly some lights came on. That's it, thought Fiona. Now it should work. While she was playing around with the wire, it sent some vibrations to Everready, and he knew something was wrong. Sterlington also knew because the wire moving around in the lock made some scraping vibrations which went along the rail, across the landing, through the landing window, out into the fresh air between the trees and lampposts and telegraph poles, through the landing window in Sterlington's house, across the landing, along the rail, and right into his brain box. Something wrong? Asked Sterlington in his special stairlift message language. It's Miss Fortune, answered Everready. She's poking a piece of wire around in my lock and made my lights go on. I'm afraid she may start riding up the stairs. What's wrong with that? Asked Sterlington. I thought that's what stairlifts like us were made for. Yes, I know that, said Everready, but Granny Pound took the key out to stop the children playing around on my seat. Not only that, Miss Fortune is wearing a long dress, and it could easily get caught under my little wheels, and she may get hurt if she's not careful. Oh, I see, replied Sterlington. Then whatever happens, don't give in to Miss Fortune, even if she does all the things right. Refuse to move, and wait until her granny comes along. Fiona tried about 6 times to make the stairlift work, but Everready didn't take any notice and kept still. Rotten stairlift, said Fiona. Why won't you go? Just then Lawrence, who had waited for a long time in the garden, walked into the hallway. What are you doing? He asked Fiona, whom some people call Miss Fortune. You know we're not supposed to touch the stairlift. I think I'll change its name to Neverready, said Fiona, because it won't go. Let me have a look, said Lawrence, who was sometimes called Lance by his friends. So Lawrence, who was quite good at machines and things, had a look. It should go, he said. All the lights are on and it's not jammed up or anything. Perhaps I can take this cover off and have a look inside. Part 7. Caught in the act. Oh, no, you won't, said Granny Pound in a very loud voice. I told you both to leave my stairlift alone. Now move away from it. Granny Pound had just woken up from her nap and wasn't very pleased to see her grandchildren doing naughty things. She found out that Fiona had poked a piece of wire in the lock, and they were all surprised when Granny Pound tried to put the key in the lock and it got stuck. "You see what happens when you interfere with other people's things," said Granny Pound. "Now I'll have to get Stan the man with the van to come and fix it, or I won't be able to get up to bed tonight." "We're very sorry," said Fiona and Lawrence. "We didn't mean to break anything, we just wanted to have a ride." Granny Pound knew they were only playing around and didn't really mean any harm. She was just going to say, "It's okay, children," when she saw it. Right in the middle of her lovely soft seat, right in the middle, where everyone could see it, was a great big stain of grease. "Who did that to my lovely seat?" she said, almost shouting. "Did what?" asked Fiona and Lawrence together. Then they saw it, and their eyes nearly popped out of their heads with surprise. "Stand still," said Granny Pound. "Don't either of you move until I find out what happened here." The children stood very still. They knew they were in enough trouble already and didn't want to upset Granny any more. She might not give them any chocolate biscuits or lunch or tea or anything at all. She might not even let them visit her again. So they stood very still. "So it was you, Fiona," said Granny Pound at last, after having a very long and careful look around. "You, little Miss Fortune, who always looks so neat and tidy. You are the one with a great blob of grease on the back of your dress. You are the one who sat on my lovely ever-ready stairlift seat and made it all greasy." Fiona was very shocked, and Lawrence was sure he saw a teardrop start to run down from her eye. "It couldn't have been me," she said to Granny Pound. "I don't use grease, and I always keep my clothes very clean." "Not today," said Granny. Lawrence knew Granny Pound was right, because Fiona turned around a little bit to hide her tear from Granny Pound, and he saw a great big blob of grease on her dress. Lawrence was just going to laugh when he realized the grease was the same color as the grease he had got on his shirt, so he kept quiet. Then he said, "Shall I try to find out where the grease came from, Granny?" "No," she answered sternly. "Just stay exactly where you are, both of you. I'll go and look." Part 8. Granny the Detective. Granny Pound asked where the children had been and started to look around the house. There was no grease on the stairs, no grease anywhere else in the hallway or on anything else on Ever Ready the stairlift. There was no grease in the front room where Granny Pound had her nap. There was no grease in the kitchen or near the front door or the back door. Then she went into the garden. Granny Pound walked slowly along the path, looking carefully at the grass and flowers as she went. Then she spotted it. Right on the bench where Lawrence and Fiona had been sitting before their game started, a giant blob of grease. What Fiona didn't know was that before she went into the garden, Lawrence had put some of the things from his pocket on the bench. Just as he was doing it, he saw a squirrel run across the grass. Lawrence watched the squirrel go behind a tree, then jump over the fence into the garden next door. The fence wasn't very high, but it was just a bit too high for him to see over. So Lawrence, whom some people call Lance for short, stood up on the bench to look over the fence. Yes, you've guessed it. One of the things he put on the bench was his tube of bike grease, and when he stood up he trod on the tube and some of the grease squirted out onto the bench. Because the grease was quite dark and the bench was quite dark, and because Lawrence had been looking towards the sun when he was watching the squirrel, he didn't notice that the grease had squirted out. When he got down off the bench, he picked up the things and put them back in his pocket. So when Fiona, whom some people call Miss Fortune, sat down on the bench to talk to Lawrence, she didn't notice the grease. That's how it got onto her dress. When Fiona went indoors and sat on Ever Ready, on his very comfortable seat, some of the grease must have got onto it. Granny Pound didn't know exactly what had happened, but after a careful look around she guessed most of it. She was quite a clever granny. When she went back indoors she said, "Why did you stand on the seat, Lawrence?" "To see Cyril the squirrel," said Lawrence. "Why do you call it Cyril?" asked Fiona Fortune, who had wiped her eyes and felt a little bit cheerier when Granny Pound went into the garden. "I call all squirrels Cyril because it rhymes," said Lawrence. "Even if they're girl squirrels?" asked Fiona. "I just said all squirrels," said Lawrence, wondering why girls have to be told everything twice. "That's enough," said Granny Pound. "Lawrence, I want you to go outside, empty your pockets, make sure the cap is on your tube of grease properly, put all your things in this plastic bag and give them to me until you go home." Granny handed Lawrence a very large, very strong, boy-proof plastic bag. Lawrence knew Granny Pound was still angry, so he didn't argue. Part 9. A change of clothes and a cup of tea. Whilst Lawrence was outside, Granny Pound helped Fiona to take her dress off and clean the grease off as well as she could. She gave Fiona some spare trousers and a t-shirt to wear. Granny usually kept a few spare clothes around in case children visit them, because grannies know things go wrong sometimes, and Eileen Pound was a girl who didn't have to be told everything twice. Eveready was a quiet stairlift, and while all this was going on, he listened very carefully. After Granny had sorted out Fiona's clothes, she went to the kitchen to make a nice cup of tea. Usually she had a cup of tea soon after her nap, but because of the horrible grease problem she had to wait and was quite thirsty by the time she actually made it. With Granny Pound in the kitchen, Lawrence in the garden and Fiona in the bedroom getting changed, Eveready sent a daytime stairlift message to Sterlington to tell him what happened. "Have you got one of those soft pastel pink seat covers?" asked Sterlington. "Yes," answered Eveready, "the smooth, normally clean stairlift. Granny Pound was furious about the grease on it, and I don't know what she will do next." But Eveready soon found out. Granny Pound did some of her best thinking when she had a nice cup of tea in her hand. She finished the tea and said, "That was absolutely delicious." Having a rest and a delicious cup of tea had helped her to work out what to do next. Part 10. Stan the Man with the Van. Granny Pound went to Eveready and looked at the label stuck on his cover. Right there in big black print was the telephone number of Stan the Man with the Van. Quite near to Eveready was a telephone, so Granny Pound phoned Stan the Man with the Van and told him about her jammed key and the horrible grease stain on her very nice seat. Well, it used to be very nice until Lawrence and Fiona managed to get some horrible grease onto it. "Don't worry," said Stan the Man with the Van. "I'm sure we can sort it out." Luckily he wasn't far away and managed to call at Granny Pound's house before the children went home. Stan the Man with the Van changed the lock and gave Granny Pound some new keys. Then he got some tools from his nice blue and orange toolbox and took the seat right off. "How can I sit on Eveready now?" asked Granny Pound, who was watching from the corner of the hall. "Don't worry," said Stan the Man with the Van. "I'll put a new seat cover on and fix it back again." In about 10 minutes he'd finished it. Eveready had a clean new seat which was even nicer and softer than the last one. Granny Pound sat on it and was ever so pleased. She tried her new key, and Eveready, knowing she was the proper owner, worked very smoothly and took her for a lovely ride up the stairs and back down again. She was so pleased she even made Stan the Man with the Van a very nice cup of tea and gave him some most delicious chocolate biscuits. Fiona, whom some people used to call Misfortune, did eventually have a ride on Eveready, the smooth, clean stairlift with the soft pink seat. It was on her birthday, and she had a ride with Granny Pound's permission, whilst her dad was there to make sure nothing went wrong. Eveready and Sterlington and all the other stairlifts around the town certainly had something to talk about after all the goings-on at Granny Pound's house. Lawrence, whom some people call Lance for short, never did stop being scruffy, but that's just the way some people are.